Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Very excited to be here in conversation with Kashmir Hill. Kashmir is a tech reporter at the New York Times and the author of Your Face Belongs to Us, which you can pick up after this, and Kashmir will be signing books for you over there. She writes about the unexpected and sometimes ominous ways technology is changing our lives, particularly when it comes to privacy. She joined the Times in 2019 after having worked at Gizmodo Media Group, Fusion, Forbes Magazine, and Above the Law. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker and The Washington Post. She has degrees from Duke University and New York University, where she studied journalism. So welcome, Kashmir.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here in New York. You've been on a whirlwind book tour, and a lot of the book actually takes place here in New York. So can we set the stage? Can you just give a little bit of an overview? You start working at the Times, it's 2019. Someone approaches you with a tip about a startup. They have scraped billions of photos of faces, and apparently they can determine who a person is just based on a photo alone. So can you tell us what this company is, and what about this company is different and what's concerning to you?
Yeah, so I find out from a public records researcher that police are kind of secretly using a company called Clearview AI, which at the time had 3 billion photos scraped from the public web. And there was very little information out there about the company. I remember on their website, they had an address here in Manhattan. It was just a few blocks away from the New York Times building when I mapped it on Google Maps. But then when I walked over to it, the building wasn't there. It didn't exist. And it was the first of many kind of weird red flags about investigating the company. It wasn't obvious who was working for them. And there just wasn't a lot out there as I was trying to dig into them. It was clear that this company that was exposing so much about us was trying to stay in the shadows. And what they had done was really shocking. We just hadn't in the US seen something like this done before. And it was this company that no one had ever heard of.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about who is behind this company? Can you tell us about Juan Tontat?
Yeah, so the main person I think of as being behind Clearview AI is a young guy named Juan Tontat. He grew up in Australia, was just obsessed with computers from an early age. At 19 years old, he dropped out of his college where he was studying computer science because he thought what the professors were teaching him was kind of boring, and moved to San Francisco, kind of chasing the dream of Silicon Valley, and was basically just trying to make it there for a while. It was 2007. He made Facebook quizzes, he made iPhone games, kind of throwing stuff at the wall to see what would stick. Nothing did. And, he ended up moving to New York in 2015, falling in with a very kind of conservative crowd, and met the people that would become his co-founders for the company that became Clearview AI.
Yeah. Something I thought was really interesting about his story, he doesn't have like some mission that he's chasing. It's definitely he just wants to know what's gonna be successful, what's gonna stick. So these Facebook quizzes and this, he does like an iPhone app like Trump hair, and like he's really just seeing what's gonna work until it seems like once he hits on facial recognition, something is different there. He really kind of goes down this like dark rabbit hole, and he you outline in the book this kind of like long history of people thinking they can determine something about a person based on their facial features. So it was just really interesting to me that he seemed pretty obsessed with, can you determine who is a shoplifter, or a border crosser, someone who's crossing illegally, or someone who's a terrorist, or a cheater. So I'm really curious if you can talk a little bit about, some of the use cases he was thinking of when he stumbles onto this idea for facial recognition technology. Like, how did he get there, and what was he trying to do with it before he discovered the use case of law enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, to set the scene, so 2015, 2016, this time that Juan Tat comes to New York is a really big time in artificial intelligence. It's when they were really starting to make advances in computer vision and machine learning or neural net technology. And this is what powers so many of the advances that surround us now, kind of chat GPT, image generation. It was the same thing with facial recognition. This was a time when computers were just getting, the computers and the software techniques were just getting so much better for computers to process all this data, recognize patterns. And so Juan Tat and his the people he kind of founded the company with originally were thinking, can we take a photo of somebody and just from their face alone understand more about them? And they weren't originally thinking about just recognizing the face and putting a name to a face, but rather what can we learn about them from their facial features? And they were tapping into ideas that we consider pretty outdated about what you can just tell about a person from their face. And so one thing he talked about doing with his co-founders was, this was around the time that Ashley Madison was breached. Does everyone know what Ashley Madison is? So an extramarital dating site. So a place to go if you want to cheat on your partner. And the people who hacked the site exposed all of the users along with their names and their addresses and email addresses. So he said, oh, we should take this database of people, look them up on Facebook, download all their faces, and then we can train a computer to know what a cheating face looks like. They had the same idea about intelligence, that you could figure out, give it a whole bunch of photos of people with high IQ and figure out who's most intelligent. Same thing with criminality. They really had this idea that computers could kind of data mine who we were and figure that out from your face. That line of their business did not end up being very successful. And Juan Tat says now that he kind of renounces that idea that computers would be capable of that. And they went instead to something that was much easier by comparison, which was just download a whole bunch of photos from the internet and make this tool that when you upload a photo of somebody, it shows you all the other places where their face appears along with a link to the website. And so that's a way you can find out their name, their social media profiles, who they know, maybe photos they don't even know are on the internet.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see how that develops into this use case for law enforcement agencies. And that's a really interesting story. Can you tell us a little bit about how he discovered that was where he wanted to, that was the target market for his product?
Yeah, so Clearview AI originally was called Smart Checker. And when they first started doing this, one of the first places actually that they got access to photos was Venmo.com, which at the time, Venmo makes everything public by default. And on Venmo.com's website, they had real-time transactions that were happening on the network, like people paying people, and it would have their photos and a link to their profile photo page. And so they ended up downloading all of these photos. And so originally Smart Checker was just like a way to take a picture of somebody and find their Venmo account. But originally they're just trying to figure out who would pay for this, like who would want this tool for taking a photo of somebody and find out who they were. And so they pitched it to hotels and companies, banks, figure out who the high net worth people are as they walk in. I mean, they were really just kind of giving it to investors, like giving it to grocery stores. And they had all of these, kind of the first people to use Clearview AI were essentially very wealthy people, many of them here in New York. My favorite story is John Katzimatidis, who is a resident billionaire, owns the Christie's. I always pronounce it incorrectly. Is it Christie's? Christie's markets. They pitched it to him to have in his grocery stores to identify shoplifters. He told me he was having a really hard time with Haagen-Dazs thieves. Like people were stealing ice cream from the stores. But they also just gave the app to him to put on his phone. And I was like, well, how'd you use it? And he said, well, one time I was having dinner at Cipriani's, the Italian restaurant in Soho, and my daughter walked in and she had this date on her arm, and I wanted to know who he was. So I had a waiter go over and take a photo of them. And then I ran the photo through Clearview AI and I figured out who the guy was, and I approved. But it was only really, they were talking to a real estate building about maybe putting Clearview AI in to kind of check the identities of people coming into the building. And the security chief there was vetting the app, and he used to work for the NYPD. And he said, wow, like this works very well. And this would be a tool that my former colleagues would love. And so he introduced them to the NYPD. So it was almost happenstance that they ended up being used by police. And then it was very popular with the NYPD.
Yeah, and you can see how people have a tendency to want to misuse a tool like that for their own personal uses. And it seems like that was part of what was happening with potentially with police departments as well, where the NYPD wanted to build in some checks to make sure that didn't happen. Do you want to mention anything around that?
Yeah, so the NYPD originally at first was used by the financial crimes unit there, and they tend to have a lot of photos of fraudsters at an ATM or at a bank counter. And so they started running these photos through Clearview AI, and it worked well. And they told their colleagues. And so Clearview AI was just offering these 30-day free trials to any police officer. So they just started handing it out like candy to the NYPD. And this is really striking to me because I don't know, when I first started looking into this, I didn't realize police could just use any tool they wanted, like just from some random guy, download it and start actively using it in investigations without kind of checking the accuracy of the algorithm, seeing how well it works. It was really just just try it and see if you like it. So it starts spreading among the NYPD. They start telling the people they know at other police departments, the Department of Homeland Security. It just kind of like started spreading like wildfire through law enforcement, as one investor put it. And the one thing the NYPD was worried about is, if we start giving it to all of our officers, how do we make sure that they're only using it for work purposes and not they're like out at a bar and they see a pretty person and run his or her photo and find out who they are. And so they were starting to ask Clearview, like, how do we kind of keep track of how many searches are being run? How do we make sure there's kind of a case number associated with it? And so Clearview AI was kind of building in those kinds of ways of monitoring usage in reaction to the police, as opposed to before they started using it.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And one of the other things I find really interesting in the book, kind of bringing it back to Juan, that there is a time where you really outline his foray into MAGA world, basically, and how he starts associating with a lot of some far right personalities, like Chuck Johnson, and also how the deplorable kind of played into the development of the tool, Smart Checker, at the time that became Clearview. So could you talk a little bit about the impact of Juan's proximity to MAGA world?
Yeah, some of the early use cases of the tool that became Clearview AI were pretty alarming to me. And so basically the first time it was used, it was still called Smart Checker at the time, was at the Deplorable in Washington, D.C., which was this event around Trump's inauguration to kind of celebrate all the work that people had done to help get him elected. And they wanted to make sure that they didn't have anybody from the far left coming in. They didn't want any Antifa people there. And so apparently they kind of searched the people who bought tickets. And they claimed that they identified two people who were affiliated with the anti-fascist coalition in DC and made sure that they didn't get tickets. And I found out about that because they used that use case when they were pitching the technology to the Hungarian government. as a border control technology. And they said, we've actually, they claimed in this presentation that they had fine-tuned their product to identify people affiliated with George Soros and the Open Society Foundations, who are kind of pushing for democratic reforms in Hungary. And they said, here, this would be a great tool for keeping them out. And so just in it, and I think it's because they were really affiliated with these kind of conservative causes. But it shows how you could use a technology like this in a very chilling and political way.
Yeah. And one of the things I think so interesting when you were talking in the book about what's different about Clearview, not necessarily a technological breakthrough, but an ethical breakthrough of sorts, where they were willing to do what others were not necessarily. And you talk about how Clearview scrapes billions of photos of faces using basically what was available. And the Ashley Madison example is classic. And then Venmo, that's so interesting that they basically took, okay, this real-time feed, we're going to just like pull these photos. But then Facebook, making profile photos public by default, and then being able to scrape all of those photos. So Facebook assures people that the technology exists to make sure that you can't scrape those photos. So what I was confused about when I was reading it was, how did Clearview come through and end up scraping all of those Facebook photos when they weren't supposed to be able to?
Yeah. So there's this problem for all of us in terms of dealing with our privacy, is that it is, one, hard for us to understand what's going to happen in technology that we need to protect ourselves against. And so I think many of us who have posted photos of ourselves and others and loved ones on the internet over the last 2 or 3 decades were anticipating that a company like Clearview AI was going to come along and scrape them all and organize the internet around our faces. So one, it's hard for us to kind of predict that and protect ourselves against that. And then there's this other question of what kind of technology companies have done or not done to protect us. And so with Facebook, I think Facebook is such an interesting company because it forced all of us to really grapple with what online privacy means, because of the way that we started putting all this information online, and it got used in unexpected ways, from your boss figuring out that you're not sick, you're on vacation, to just having everyone stalk your relationship status. But Facebook, it kind of encouraged us all to put our photos online and do it right alongside our faces. And we've done it on Facebook, we've done it on Instagram, and they haven't done. I know that they try to make sure that people don't come along and scrape it, and they say in their terms of service that you're not supposed to come along and scrape that data. But Clearview AI and other actors have kind of done it again and again. So unfortunately, there's just not people that are really protecting us. Juan Tat, he developed scrapers himself. He also told me about just hiring like random people that he met in strange corners of the internet to go out and hunt faces for him. And he said sometimes he wouldn't even know their names. They would just be like, oh, I scraped couchsurfing.com and AngelList, and I've got this collection of faces. Do you want to buy it? You can pay me in, Ether or some other cryptocurrency. And so, yeah, it was just kind of this free for all on the internet to go get faces. And I think it's hard for us to protect ourselves against that, because it's not just the photos that you yourself have posted publicly. It's people who have other people who have posted photos of you.
And there are, of course, companies that have many of our photos, like Google and Facebook. And I think it's so interesting. At the end of part 1, you talk about how these companies could do it, but chose not to. And you say it wasn't that they couldn't build it, it was that they were afraid to. So why was big tech afraid to do something that a random startup like Clearview AI was not?
Yeah, so when I first found out about Clearview AI and reported about it, I and the people I talked to, experts I interviewed, we all thought that Clearview AI had made this technological breakthrough, that, they had done something that Silicon Valley, the government hadn't been able to do, gather all these photos from everywhere and create this very powerful algorithm for searching them all. But as I did more reporting and for the book, I discovered that Google had developed a technology like this internally as early as 2011. Then Chairman Eric Schmidt said it was the one technology that Google had developed but decided to hold back. I think that would change now with the current generative AI tools. I think Google had tools they didn't release, and then OpenAI kind of changed the game. But Facebook too, I got to see this video of Facebook engineers in a conference room in Menlo Park with the most absurd version of the future I've ever seen. One of the engineers is wearing a baseball cap and has a smartphone on the brim of it, held in place by rubber bands. And when he looked around the room and the camera focused on somebody, the phone would speak the person's voice. And so actually the technology companies, and Google and Facebook aren't known for being super, privacy holdouts. They have changed the norms. Google's the company that sent Street View cars out around the world to put all of our homes on the internet. But this technology was something that they saw as a step too far. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's just very radical and challenging to our privacy, this idea that anyone can put a name to our face at any point in the real world. I think that they were under a lot of scrutiny. They said that they were worried it could be used in dangerous ways. And I think when you have these kind of big technology companies that are subject to the public talking about them, lawmakers, regulators, they'd had a lot of privacy lawsuits. I think they decided, the world's not ready for this yet. But then you get a company like Clearview AI that was able to take advantage of open source technologies, facial recognition algorithms that were very accessible, all of these photos on the internet. And they just decided to move forward with it, to break through this taboo. And the breakthrough that they made was really an ethical one, that they were willing to do what other actors weren't.
And do you see a future where once Clearview AI kind of breaks the seal, that other actors like Google or Facebook or other startups would potentially step in and do the same or take it to a new level? What do you see coming if Clearview AI ends up kind of testing the legal implications for this, going through like taking the legal risk, and then determining like what are the guardrails and what's socially acceptable?
So there are already copycats, and Clearview AI has decided to limit the use of its database it now has 30 billion faces in its database, probably has many of you in its database. They've limited it to police use. But there are other public face search engines now that have gone online in the last few years. One is called PimEyes, and anyone can use it. Like, you can go to pimeyes.com right now and upload your photo, and they have a smaller database than Clearview AI, but it may well show you other photos of you on the internet, maybe some you know about, maybe some that you don't. And it's a subscription, you can pay $30 a month and you're able to do this. I talked to one person. He kind of came to me and essentially confessed that he was using PimEyes in a really disturbing way. And he wanted to tell me the story because he didn't think you should be able to use it this way. And he wanted policymakers to know. And I call him David in the book. He didn't want to have his real name revealed, but he basically had a porn addiction and kind of this privacy kink where he would see women in online pornography and then go use PimEyes to find out their real names, their kind of vanilla lives, like find their high school photos on Flickr. And then when he kind of got tired of doing that, he went through his list of Facebook friends and started looking for risque photos of them that might be on the internet. And he found things, on revenge porn sites, kind of non-consensual uploads of their photos that were obscure, their names were not attached to it, but then suddenly when you have this face search engine, you're able to do it. So it's already out there, which is part of why I feel like this book is so necessary right now to decide whether these tools should be out there, whether they should exist, how easy it is for us to get out of these databases. And then I think for the big tech companies, now that there's been this breakthrough, they will probably be reckoning with whether they do something similar. And I could totally imagine. So Clearview is working on these augmented reality glasses that that the app works in. And I've tried these actually, where you look at somebody, a circle appears around their face, you tap it, and it'll pull up all the photos of them online. And Facebook, or Meta, has also talked about, they have augmented reality glasses in development. And their chief technology officer has said, we'd love to put facial recognition capabilities in it. It would be this great tool, at an event like this, you would just know people's names. Or if you went to a cocktail party and there's somebody that you've met 5 times and you can't remember their name, it could supply it to you. They've said, the chief technology officer said, we're not sure this would be legal. We're not sure if society wants this. So they're kind of holding back to see what happens. But I could imagine a kind of consent model for facial recognition technology in the real world, where a company that has your social graph, like knows who you're connected to, would allow you to create privacy settings for your face, where you could say, okay, I'm comfortable being recognized by people I'm connected to, my friends or friends of friends or the public at large. I do think that's one possible future for this technology, depending on what we decide as a society about what we want.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And speaking of what we decide that we want, I think it's so interesting, like throughout the book, the way you framed it.
Can I ask a quick question, though? Who in this audience, if you had the option to opt into this and you could say, I'm willing to let my face be recognized, how many of you would actually do it? Is there only one hand up? Wow. Well, I asked the same question in San Francisco, and 1/3 of the audience raised their hands.
Yeah. The responsible tech audience may be less interested in that. Throughout the book, you are showing this kind of, it's nonlinear. You kind of, I think it's really well done and super compelling the way you kind of show these, the contextual framing around different events that happened, that basically, where you can see where the public's appetite for privacy is shifting, and certain events that really pivot things suddenly. For instance, you talk about 9/11 and how the appetite for security suddenly trumps any privacy concerns. You talk about Edward Snowden, and how his whistleblowing on the wiretapping, the domestic wiretapping from the NSA, basically shifted the public's interest in, it went from concerns about corporate surveillance to government surveillance. And then you talk about COVID complicating our relationship with privacy, and then also even the impact of Russia invading Ukraine. And you can really see where like momentum shifts, and how public opinion really matters. And so this is a really interesting time where I think because of even just ChatGPT, I think there's a lot of public interest now because of the accessibility of an app like that, interest around AI. I think that's putting a lot of pressure on policymakers. We're having a moment around AI and AI policy making. And of course, in the EU, the EU AI Act is probably going to pass by the end of the year. And so I wonder, do you see this being a moment where AI more broadly, and maybe some of these issues around surveillance and how it dovetails with privacy, do you see this being a moment where we really can have a shift, and where, this is a time where we can actually like change the conversation around privacy and AI?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a moment outside of the United States. After Clearview AI, after I kind of exposed the existence of the company, privacy regulators in Europe, in Canada, in Australia launched investigations into Clearview AI, and they determined that under their privacy laws, what the company had done was illegal, and that, under their privacy laws, Clearview AI couldn't just go and collect all these photos of their citizens and, create a biometric, face print for them and have the searchable database. They said, no, you can't do this. This is illegal. Kicked, Clearview AI out of their countries. Clearview AI stopped working with law enforcement in those countries, and all of those regulators recently put out a statement that said, just because people are putting information out on social media sites, they're putting it out publicly, doesn't revoke their privacy interest in that information. We have not had that same moment in the United States. We just don't have the same kind of privacy protections. We don't have anything at the national level that really addresses what Clearview AI did, or what many of these other AI companies are doing, where they're just collecting a lot of information off of the internet, sometimes quite private, and training it to do new things. And so, I do wonder what is going to happen here. There's some states that have relevant laws. The main one is Illinois passed this very prescient law in 2008 called the Biometric Information Privacy Act. And I tell the history of it in the book. But it says that if you want to use people's biometrics, like their face or their fingerprints or their voice print, as a company, you need to get their consent or be fined up to $5,000. And so people that are in Illinois can, Clearview wasn't supposed to put them in their database, and they can get out of the database. And we see this playing out in the real world. My favorite example is Madison Square Garden right here in New York City. Very popular, arena for basketball games and hockey games, and every major musical act plays there. Madison Square Garden installed facial recognition technology a few years ago, not Clearview AI, different company, for security reasons, to make sure that they kept out people who might be violent, as a way to protect the big crowds in the stadium that's on top of Penn Station, a major transportation hub. But in the last year, James Dolan, who owns Madison Square Garden, said, well, the other people that we keep out of the arena are people I dislike, lawyers. And so Madison Square Garden went to the sites of about 90 law firms that had existing complaints against his company, scraped the faces of all the lawyers who worked at every firm, and created a ban list. And when those people try to go to Madison Square Garden or Beacon Theater or Radio City Music Hall, like a mom who went with a Girl Scouts troop to see the Rockettes play at Radio City Music Hall last Christmas, they get turned away and told that they're not welcome until the litigation is resolved. And Madison Square Garden also owns a theater in Chicago, but they can't do that there. They can't keep out lawyers with facial recognition technology because they don't have the consent to use their biometrics. So we're seeing this real difference around the country and around the world in terms of how protected your face is.
Yeah, I have a few questions left. One is from our community. We're not doing a public Q&A, but we have had some questions come in through our registration form. And one related to that, apart from legislative victories, what accessible or practical victories have you seen against facial recognition tech?
That's an interesting question. So from civil society, one of the big kind of characters in the book is the ACLU, because they've kind of been fighting facial recognition technology since 2001, when it was did not work very well, but was deployed on the crowd at the Tampa Bay Super Bowl, which became the Snooper Bowl in the press. And so the ACLU has really been pushing for a moratorium on the use of facial recognition technology until we can grapple with accuracy, issues of bias, and just civil liberties. And they've had bans on police use in several cities, San Francisco being one of the big ones, Somerville, Massachusetts for a while, Oregon put a moratorium, Portland, Oregon put a moratorium on use. There's some bills that have been passed at the state level around how police should use it, like whether you need a warrant to search someone's face, what kind of crimes you should use it for. And then I think just at the individual level, like things that you can do, there are state privacy laws unfortunately not one here in New York, but in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Virginia, that give you the right to access information that a company holds on you and delete it. And so people in those places can go to Clearview and say, get me out, see what they have on them, and then say, delete it. Yeah, so there's been some things that have happened that are kind of hopeful.
Yeah, that's great. And it's good to know as a community here, what kinds of things we might be able to do and actions we can take. So at All Tech is Human, we see our mission as building and strengthening the responsible tech ecosystem. And a lot of what we talk about is how people come to responsible technology. And pretty much everyone has a nonlinear path, how they get here. So I do want to say that that your article was really instrumental for me in getting interested in responsible technology, taking it from something that I saw in a small niche way in the music industry where I had a past life, and seeing how those same issues are being played out across society in much more impactful spaces like law enforcement. But I would like to know, and a question from the community here in the same vein, we have this question. What was your pathway into this space? How did you get interested in this topic? And you can interpret that however. I'm not sure if that is this topic being privacy or facial recognition tech or tech journalism, but how did you come to this space?
So I've been writing about privacy and technology for over 10 years. Basically since the beginning of my journey as a journalist, because I became a blogger at a time when more and more people were getting on the internet, and it's just so easy to find information about people as a journalist, and then just these companies starting to create kind of vast dossiers on us, what we click on, what we're reading, what we're emailing, what we're sending in messages. We just have such vast kind of digital trails. And that is what I found so compelling about facial recognition technology, that the face becomes this key in the real world to unlocking everything that's knowable about you from online. And just seeing the way that that is playing out already, Clearview AI making it possible for police to identify strangers, Madison Square Garden banning lawyers. The way we're seeing this happen with Madison Square Garden kind of presents other ways that businesses might discriminate against us. Like if you write a bad Yelp review or Google review of a business, are they going to put you on a list and make sure you're never allowed inside again, or that they spit in your soup if you are? And then kind of more chilling usage of facial recognition technology in places that are further ahead of us, like in Russia and in China, where they're identifying protesters and then they'll appear at their house the next day to ticket them for protesting, or using it to suppress human rights or monitor Uyghur Muslims in China. China's interesting because they put this, they really have facial recognition deployed much more widely, on cameras, kind of real-time recognition of people, and they've used it for kind of security threats, but then also to name and publicly shame people who wear pajamas in public. They will use it to just automatically ticket jaywalkers, which would be horrible if that was deployed in New York. We would all get tickets all the time. They even have at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, and the public restrooms, they were having problems with toilet paper thieves who would come in and just take the whole roll. So they installed facial recognition cameras. And so you have to look into the camera to get a certain amount of toilet paper. And then you have to wait, like 7 minutes or something until you can get more. So you can just see that, once you start thinking about all the different ways this could be deployed, it could just be so chilling. It could just be tracked all the time, that you would no longer have a zone of privacy kind of in any public space. And I just, a future where we just cease to be able to be anonymous is very frightening to me. And so, it's why I came to this subject and why I wrote the book.
Yeah. And one final question from the audience. What is the biggest challenge in reporting about technology?
I find the biggest challenge is probably just making sure that you understand how it works and really relating it to people's lives. And so I think facial recognition technology is easy in a way because you can just imagine all these things about your face and how it could be used. Just think about the photos of you that have been taken over the years and whether maybe any of those are on the internet and maybe they could be found, things that you don't want known about you. I often try to do with technology first person style pieces because I think it helps people relate to it. So back in 2013, I lived on Bitcoin for a week. I cut all the big tech giants out of my life at one point to demonstrate just how hard that is to do. I turned my apartment into a smart home and monitored all the data going in and out of it. More recently, I stalked my husband with AirTags and tiles and a GPS tracker with his consent, but just to show how easy it is, it's getting to invade people's privacy and how hard it can be for them to detect it. So I think just making sure that people feel like they understand the technology, understand how it impacts their lives, and then hopefully, we as individuals and then as a society at the policymaker level, that we make better decisions, that we can harness the good of technology and avoid the kind of worst dystopian outcomes.
All right, and one last question. What is next for you?
Oh man, just going home after this long book tour. I don't know. I'm always looking for ideas for new stories. A lot of people give me tips. So if there's anything in here that you guys think is worthy of investigation, I'm here. I'm going to be signing books. But I love suggestions. So I don't know exactly right now, but more reporting on tech, I'm sure.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much, Kashmir Hill.